Hello and welcome to the One Take Show, a podcast where we celebrate incredible conversation with some phenomenal people. And I'm so excited to bring to you this amazing episode of the One Take Show. Every law student has heard of the very famous case Shreya Singhal versus Union of India, where ma'am had filed a PIL before Supreme Court of India in 2012 against Information Technologies Act, where the court decided to strike down section 66A for it being unconstitutional and hence deciding the scope of free speech in India, especially on digital platforms, making it one of the most landmark judgments in our country. In this episode, I'm in conversation with ma'am herself. Ma'am is a practicing advocate in New Delhi. In this episode, we'll talk about her journey with law, her experience with the petition. We'll also talk about the case itself and the journey of the case for about 5 years now. We will also cover the free speech on digital platforms and how is it evolving with time. If you like this episode, make sure you like, share and subscribe to the channel. If you have any suggestions and feedbacks, make sure you reach out to me or write them down in the comment section. I would love that too. And ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, let's jump right in. Hello, ma'am. Welcome to the One Take Show. This is a real honor for me to have you on my podcast. Something that every law student, not just law student, I think anyone who's aware about what's happening in Indian polity or Indian culture in totality, what is affecting us as a society, is aware of your name, is aware of a very landmark judgment that begins with your name. Thank you so much for taking time off your really busy schedule and sitting down with me for this amazing conversation.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Perfect. So, ma'am, before we get into the entire story about the case or other such experiences, I am rather curious about what is your experience with law. And this is one question that I tend to ask all my guests, because I, as a student, would love to know about their inspiration, why they opted for law, and what was their experience with law school. So, could you please tell me a little bit about that?
So honestly, initially I didn't want to do law. I didn't want to have to do anything with it because my entire family are lawyers, all of them. Mm-hmm. So, dinner time conversation and all always was about what's happening in parliament, what's happened in court. And it was very boring as a child to constantly only listen to that. Honestly, what really pushed me, and that's why I didn't do law right out of school. I didn't do the 5-year thing. I didn't take any of the entrance exams, nothing. I went and did astrophysics, completely different. Mm-hmm. And, then I came back. I had 1 year where, in between, I was trying to figure out what to do. And I started working at Lawyers Collective, which is Indira Jaising and Anand Grover's NGO, and they have a women's rights organization in that. Right. So I was working in that, and it dealt, and the kind of work that we were doing was mainly in respect of the Domestic Violence Act. And, that really got me thinking about what to do, how to do it. And that's also around the time where I realized what was happening with Section 66A, and I filed the petition and stuff like that. And so I think my decision really to do law came after I filed the petition, where I said that, I realized that perhaps this is what I want to do, not just, this is what I want to do as a profession, not just file a case.
I think that is really fascinating on two very specific grounds. Firstly, as we know, as we law students, we are always very eager to somehow celebrate ourselves as one of those people who get to somehow participate in this entire process, especially with the maturity and experience we get to do that once we enter the profession. But your story is rather interesting. You have decided to get into law after really having a taste of how it actually feels like in court. What was that experience like? Did that somehow give you a specific experience that somehow motivated you towards law?
It was more just the process. It wasn't the actual court appearance and all, because honestly, the first day, there was no dhamaka that you expect as a law student. I'm going to go to court and all. There's no dhamaka really that happened, but it was the entire process. It was the fact that, doing law is a subject which, even if you don't end up practicing law, it's a very good degree to have. It's a very empowering degree and it gives you a kind of thinking. So I wouldn't even say it's a degree. It's a very important lesson for people to learn. People who study law, they may not end up being lawyers, they may not end up being in-house counsel, they may not end up being practicing at all. And you may take up photography, you may take up anything after that. But it's something that's very empowering, because it really goes to the core of being able to explain to you what your rights are, what your remedies are, and it's not going to let you be taken for a ride by anyone.
Okay. So you think that this idea of empowering and the kind of education that we receive from law schools perhaps gives us that set of skills that has its own value, irrespective of whether we end up in the industry or not.
Yeah, it's not about going to court. Honestly, it's about being able to take, you will be so self-sufficient that you're not going to be taken for lawyers get a really bad rap. They overcharge, they don't, will litigate more than is required and all. But here, you also end up being the master of your own life. And even something so small, like say if you have to sign a contract, you're not going to have to go to a lawyer. You'll be able to vet it for yourself. Any contract that's there, like, say you are taking on a project, you start a business, and like, you're hiring employees, you become an entrepreneur, you're hiring employees, and all that employment contract you'll be able to do yourself. Or even entering contracts with anyone else, at least the basics will be there. Yeah, you won't be up to date with what is happening in court and all, but at least the basics are there. What is in your, what is good for you, what is not.
Right. And that reminds me of a very wonderful quote that one of my guests provided me with, was that the law schools do not teach us law or how to learn law, but actually teach us how to read law, in a sense to have that skill to understand the underlying meaning and the critical analysis of the same. This brings me to a rather interesting story of yours. You say that you've decided to do law after that very famous petition, obviously. And so that brings me to rather question that what was your experience in law school in retrospect after you've already experienced something that was so landmark in nature?
So I went to law fac at DU. So, there was, DU is what it is. There's a lot of self-learning. There's a lot of being left alone to do your own thing. And, I guess that's what really shaped law for me now also, because I quite like being able to discover it myself rather than being told, acha, look in this section, look here, look at this case. So it's, it's interesting in that sense. So yeah, in hindsight, DU was great because it gave me a lot of independence, a lot of freedom, and with that independence and freedom, a lot of responsibility, that whatever you have to do yourself. You can't just assume that, because it's in the case material or because it's the teacher has said. It's that hunger for learning. And that's what law is. It doesn't stop when you graduate, when you've given your 5th year exam.
Right.
Every day in court is like an exam. You're preparing because you don't know what the judge will ask. So you're preparing your briefs, you're preparing what arguments you're going to make. All of that is literally, it's like going for an exam every day. And you're giving the best that you have. And this is what my senior tells me, that, it doesn't matter who's on the opposite side. You're not arguing for the opposite side. You're arguing to the judge. Whatever your case is, your best case, you argue to the judge. See what the judge is saying, how he's reacting to it. The other side is irrelevant. It can be Rajiv Nayyar, it can be someone junior to you.
Right. And all those customary things that we go through in law school, for example, moots, writing papers, and internships and all, with your perspective, since you've somehow already been with that practical, since we all go to internships to have that practical flavor of life and somehow understand how it all works, you have actually had that experience before you got into law school. Since these things did also make sense to you or add some sort of a contributing factor in your somehow professional identity?
Honestly, I didn't do very many internships, but I've seen a lot of interns come into our office, and I think what they also appreciate is being given something interesting to do. So I would say go do an internship in a lawyer's office who's doing a lot of filing, who's doing the whole district court thing and the high court, where you'll get that exposure, be able to understand how to do it, how to get by it, not just stuck on inspections and stuff like that. But and intern as an intern, if you take the initiative, like say if you ask whoever is whoever you have to report to, if you ask them, can I have some drafting to do, can I do anything, they'll be more than happy to do it and sit with you on it. And if any small thing also. So I've had a lot of interns who have asked, and I've given them whatever drafting that I could, and they like. So I think that it's a great learning experience where it's kind of like cycling with training wheels.
Right. Obviously, I think,
and not just about taking a back seat.
Absolutely. I think I completely agree with you on that. As an intern also, I keep experiencing this, that as soon as I start, this idea of enterprise and somehow being participative enough is really rewarding in multiple aspects. This brings me to the big question. I think every audience member who's possibly going to watch this episode will be waiting for the story, your version of the story. I mean, obviously, we law students have gone through the facts, the judgment, the ratio and everything of the case. We have gone through it multiple times trying to understand the jurisprudence behind it. But what was your version of the story? How it all came about, and what led you into this sort of a movement that this case has created? An awareness in the field of digital identity and digital privacy.
Honestly, this entire thing, I mean, it didn't start off as wanting to file something. It didn't, even though I come from a family of lawyers, it wasn't, I didn't know what to do. And filing of the case, it was a dinner time conversation with my mother, because I'd just come back from England, where I was studying. I just graduated, and I suddenly come back and I see, literally girls who were as old as me and my friends getting arrested, and you see what they were arrested for, the kind of messages. I mean, it was a post and one girl had liked it. So I was just shocked that what was happening in a dinner time conversation ended up being an argument with my mother, and she said, so why don't you do something about it? And at some point, I think everyone reaches that breaking point, that okay, because you just assume someone will do something, so everyone, you just keep quiet until something happens. But I think that's what reached, like I think I reached my breaking point then, and I said that enough is enough. Like, I can't wait for someone to do something. God knows if anyone will even do anything. And that's when I decided that, okay, I think this is the time to, do something. And that's when I approached my mother's friends, Ninad Lad and Ranjita Rodgi. Ranjita is AOR in the Supreme Court, and Ninad is a very, very good lawyer. They both are. And, they helped with the entire process, and somehow we had a petition ready, and I don't even know how that happened. But it was an adrenaline thing. Like, when you have to do something, when you're passionate about something, the adrenaline kicks in and you get very excited about it. And in hindsight, only you realize what has happened, not then. But even then, I don't think anyone realized the impact that it would have, the kind of the way the internet, especially now today during this lockdown and stay at home, work from home, I don't think anyone realized how much the internet would be a part of their lives.
Absolutely. Before this gives me an opportunity to ask you, before I get into whether this has changed and what all opinion do you have about how it has turned out. You say that when you come back to India, you see that there is a need for such form of an awareness where people feel free to perhaps comment something on social media, and the social media account should not be a ground for them to be arrested, if I just say crudely enough. What was that major difference? If we say your experience in UK, you say that the culture there so different that it was striking enough for you to notice it in India?
I mean, the culture, there is a difference, and I think the shock was mainly with the fact that there is a very similar law that they had in England. Section 127 or 125, I think, I don't exactly remember, which was verbatim, if memory serves. And there were arrests that happened about in connection with that as well. One gentleman who was sitting on a plane where his plane had been delayed, so he tweeted, I think I'm going to blow this airport up or this plane up or something. He was waiting on the tarmac for 4 hours. I think that resulted in a ban from him from entering America, but it also got him arrested under this section 127. So, they have since struck it down there as well. And so that, I think, the thing is, you have to progress. And something with the internet, it's not it can't be because this country has it, or any laws really. It can't be that because this country has it and still has it, that is why we have it. Someone asks you to jump off a cliff, you're not going to follow blindly. It has to be something thought out, something that applies to the Indian situation, which is in our socio-economic, cultural milieu of, the hotpot that is India, with so many different views, so many different people, types of religion, everything. It has to be in conformity with our situation. It can't be something that, it works in the UK, it works in America, so it has to come, let's import it here into our law. It's not it's not a tangible thing, that it's not a material thing like a consumer good or something.
Absolutely. And with respect to the effect of this case that it has somehow created in our society, it's been about 5 years now, if I'm not wrong, it's been about 5 years now.
Yeah.
One major conversation that has now surfaced is obviously about the importance of free speech and what impact does internet have on free speech. We have some of the leading lawyers who are arguing against social media platforms like Twitter. We have arguments about how censorship should not be there or censorship should be there. There are both sides, both schools of thought. What is your opinion when you see the impact of the case 5 years down the line with everything that is happening around us right now?
5 years down the line, honestly, it's developing. The internet is developing so fast, and I see developing because it is an evolution, and people are they're on the internet more. The way we use the internet is changing. It's not just something left only for the occasional email or the occasional message here and there. It's you're working from home, everything has moved virtual. Even courts to a large extent have moved virtual. So it's all, I think, the way 5 years from now, how the internet has affected our lives and how we have molded our lives with the internet is something that honestly I can't foresee now, because 5 years ago I couldn't foresee how indebted we'd be to the internet, where it's so lonely that the only way we can in the middle of a pandemic be still isolated because of the safety angle, but together with our friends and families through the internet. And my 91-year-old grandfather has been learning how to do WhatsApp phone calls, video calls, and so that's you can't say what will happen. But one thing you can say is that the internet is changing so fast that our laws can't be archaic. They can't be something that will be a strict interpretation which is inflexible. Because with the internet, the laws that are there, the way crime is changing on the internet, the way internet use is changing, it needs to be able to deal with that. But at the same time, it can't be something that is the restrictions that are there, which are almost like gag orders. Those, yes. It can't be a blanket restriction on freedom of speech and all. So yes, there are things like child pornography or cyberbullying. Those things need to be tackled. The government needs to have sensitization programs for the police to be able to deal with cybercrime, to be able to take into account people making complaints on the cybercrime website. that portal is there, but they don't respond to it because the police just doesn't know what to do. Like, you have trolls on social media. We're not being able to deal with those trolls, but the only thing that is coming out of all of that is, let's just stop everything and ban it only. And that blanket ban, so to speak, can't be it, because there is a freedom of speech which is there, which has to be protected.
Absolutely. I think freedom of speech and the entire argumentation about Article 19(2) has been the crux of this judgment in a sense, which talks about at what point of time do we draw a line, at what point of time do we erase that line. In your opinion, when you mention the idea of freedom of speech, or when you mention the idea of, let's say, trolling, there are two different tangents and can be used as an argumentation from both the ends. That one of the side effects of having a freedom of speech, and perhaps an argument that will be given to an absolutist of a freedom of speech would be that, okay, there are side effects, that is trolling that is available, people might resort to bullying and all of that. Where do you see that a balance could be can be obtained by perhaps a judgment or perhaps legislation, or do you see that this judgment would have some sort of an impact on this case?
I think we have that balance. I'm not advocating for more laws. I'm advocating for the existing laws to be, to be taken into the digital forum and to be implemented properly. And trolling, the thing is, you can't have, because of fringe elements who misuse a right given, you can't simply ban the right for the rest, because the point of freedom of speech is the fact that, in a democracy, you have the right to dissent. Everyone agreeing with the majority is okay, that speech will always be protected. Everyone agreeing with the majority, that speech will be protected. But when there is dissent, that is what needs to be protected. And you can't have a blanket judgment or a law that comes in and says that, okay, there is a lot of trolling on Twitter, let's ban Twitter.
Right. And with respect to this balance that you talk about now, and you obviously mentioned the idea that there should not be perhaps more laws, but an effective implementation of the same. With the upcoming bills that we see, there are a lot of bills that are being talked about. There's one bill that is Personal Data Protection Bill, which is in consideration, which has drawn a lot of criticism, sort of a conversation around it, debates are happening around it. What do you see, in your opinion, where is the jurisprudence evolving towards when we have bills like personal data protection and privacy is being talked about?
See, I mean, the data protection bill, even its architect is very unhappy with the way the bill has been finally presented. And Justice Sai Krishna, who has been a foremost person, authority on the internet, on data and laws on the internet, he's the architect, and he himself is now criticizing the current form that it's been put in, and the fact that it has till date has not been passed in whatever manner. That speaks a lot to it, because it can't be something that is under the guise of data protection turns out to be something else. So I think that data protection is a very important issue. It's something that we can look to our European counterparts, how they have dealt with data, and how to be forgotten, the right to be forgotten, which is a big thing especially in Europe. The US also has a lot of data protection laws, and I think we can look to them and see how laws in respect of data and identity and protection and privacy, how they can be implemented in India. Because here you have these laws which have been there for a while, for the last at least 4 or 5 years, and you can see how they've evolved and how practically implementable they are and what are the kinks. So yes, it is a good thing to look there, not copy paste, but to look there, take a good example from them and to implement it here.
Absolutely. And I think the idea of borrowing, there are obviously legislations across the world which have talked about the pioneering concept of data privacy, and they have brought about different changes. And again, adopting them in our country would be a way to evolve our own jurisprudence. With respect to, there's one point that I would bring back to obviously the celebrated case is the effect that it has created, and one such factor is implementation. Now, there have been talks about the effective implementation, or there has been an insufficient implementation of the case or the judgment. We see fallouts and fallbacks all the time. Perhaps there has been a conversation around that. What is your opinion on the kind of effectiveness or the implementation with respect to implementation of this judgment is concerned?
So, honestly, I've seen in the cases that I've done so far, a lot of there are laws that are misused. And quite frankly, I think that 66A was always misused. The fact that it is still being misused despite it having been struck down is unfortunate. It's sad, but that's the reason why also what really also pushed me to filing this case was that what was being reported were the so-called sensational cases where it was being used. The trickle down happens, and unfortunately, it does take time to trickle down to the district courts in rural areas, to the police stations in rural areas, not just in rural areas, but even in Delhi. In one of the cases that I was handling at one point, one of the sections in the FIR was 66A, and that was by an order of a magistrate sitting in Patiala House Court. So, it's not just about the far-flung back of beyond rural areas. It's right here in Delhi. So this is, unfortunately, this is the way our system works. We have to, I've realized that there's very little to do about the slow pace of it. That is something you have to kind of come to terms with and push that the dissemination of information happens. You clear out the cogs in those communication lines. You make it more transparent, and now hopefully with the fact that everything is going virtual, a lot of this information and this lag between say a city and a district and a rural area, that lag I think is really disappearing, and the human interference in that is also disappearing, because it's everything, you're just marking everyone on one email.
True.
And it's just going out electronically. It is that fast, it's happening instantaneously, and I think this will be a real push in the right direction for the judiciary to digitize itself, to and Justice Chandrachud is doing he's the chairman of the computer committee and the digitization of courts and all, and the at least in Delhi, the e-filing, there are a few kinks in the district courts and the high courts, but by and large, honestly, as a lawyer, I think that that's much more convenient. So I think that with this push and training the judiciary, training the police officers, training lawyers to be able to use it and to move to a digital platform where all of this, you're cutting out a lot of wastage. It will be much better in the long run. And I think that's why 66A has helped us now, because it's not going to be, there's one less impediment.
Absolutely. True. And I think this was the most essential realization that any person who perhaps reads a judgment, especially someone who's trying to learn the legal education, going through the legal education, would perhaps realize, is that the judgment really strikes a balance and shows the importance of freedom of speech, especially when it comes to digital sphere. And that has now started creating a lot of conversation about how and what and where can people write something, type something, and what all conversations can somehow revolve around the accountability of the social media platforms and the regulatories on the same. I think this kind of a conversation will really benefit a lot of law students who are trying to somehow follow your footsteps and see the light of how exactly things turn out when it comes to some of the most landmark judgments. Obviously, as you mentioned, you can only realize a judgment is landmark when you see it from the hindsight. But still, do you have any tips for the law students or legal aspirants who are entering the industry and who wish to follow your footsteps to somehow contribute to Indian jurisprudence in a way like you did?
Honestly, the only thing I can do is stay true to your convictions, and it's not going to be ground breaking, path breaking to begin with. There will be struggle, but every little thing helps. You may get a small case, someone refers a small check bounce case to you, or a will, or your domestic help is having some matrimonial issue, something like that comes to you. Honestly, we've all done it and we still do it, but you are helping that one person's life, and that is the change. So don't assume every change has to be a big change, and I will work on the biggest cases in the country. Yeah, you may be doing that, and but real change is also what you're helping in your own community. So it is starting small, no matter how small, how big. Don't say no, be hungry for work, and it'll come, and slowly, yeah, you'll get that one thing that really strikes at the heart of you, at the core of your existence, that this is wrong. What is happening is wrong. I want to do something. And the law has given you the tools, the weapons to be able to do something about it, and to make a change that is that will benefit a larger amount of people. So by filing a PIL, yeah, that is one method to challenge something. Another one, and none of these methods, like even a protest or a march, none of them are greater or lesser than the other. They're all equal. But I feel that the traditional route, what has happened traditionally, is that when challenging the protests of the past have been a legal challenge to the law. And I think that is something that a lot of people are now realizing is an avenue open to them, and it's something that should be embraced, and go for it.
Perfect. I think these are the words that every law student should live by, and I personally will also try to somehow start taking the initial steps, step by step, somehow try to grapple as many opportunities as I can. But as of this moment, I think one of the major impacts that Shreya Singhal versus Union of India, this wonderful judgment has created for law students like me, is to really celebrate our digital identity, and somehow has given me an inspiration to explore the possibilities through a platform like this, and to have a conversation with you. It was a wonderful experience, ma'am. Do you have any closing remarks for our listeners?
Thank you so much. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak. And honestly, I think, like, even you taking this initiative, having a blog, it's not something a lot of students have. I mean, maybe now they do at my time, and there's still a big gap between your time and my time. It was very little, because we were more interested in partying and not going to class. No, see, you doing this, taking this initiative is a step forward. It's educating people about their rights. It is seizing the opportunity, and kudos to you, and this is a really great initiative.
Thank you so much, ma'am. I think that is all that this podcast is about, and to have an opportunity to talk to you. And I had a wonderful time speaking to you. I hope you had a good time too.
I did as well. Thank you so much.